the cursed jungle of Tarzan. Once upon a time, in the heart of the dense and unforgiving Amazon rainforest, there existed a mysterious village, hidden from the world. This village was said to be cursed, and those who dared to enter never returned. The locals spoke in hushed tones about a creature who roamed the jungle, an ancient being with the strength of 100 men, but a heart as dark as the deepest night. He was known as Tarzan. Tarzan was no ordinary man. He was the product of a dark and forbidden ritual. Born in the jungle under a blood-red moon, he had the body of a man but the mind of an animal. His eyes glowed with an eerie yellow light, and his skin was covered in strange, rune-like markings that seemed to shift whenever one tried to focus on them. Legends told that he was a protector of the jungle, but as time passed, the jungle had become his prison. One fateful day, a group of explorers ventured into the heart of the jungle, seeking to uncover its secrets. Among them was Sarah, a brave and curious archaeologist who had heard whispers of the cursed village. Ignoring the warnings of the locals, she and her team set off on their journey, determined to find the truth. Days passed, and the jungle seemed to close in around them. The thick foliage made it impossible to tell which way was north, and eerie noises echoed through the trees, unexplained whispers and the sound of branches snapping underfoot. As they trekked deeper, they stumbled upon the remnants of an ancient village, its buildings decaying and overtaken by vines. The air was thick with an unnatural silence. Sarah felt an odd chill run down her spine as she noticed something unusual. Strange, human-like footprints in the dirt, but much larger than any person she had ever seen. The footprints seemed to lead deeper into the jungle. Ignoring the growing sense of dread, Sarah urged her team to follow the trail. As night began to fall, the jungle came alive with terrifying sounds. The howls of unseen creatures, the rustling of leaves, and the distant crash of something large moving through the undergrowth. The group set up camp, but none of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched. That night, as Sarah lay awake, a shadow passed near their camp. She sat up, heart pounding, and saw a figure lurking at the edge of the firelight. It was tall, muscular, and covered in wild, matted hair. Its eyes glowed with an unearthly yellow hue, and it was watching them, unmoving. Terrified, Sarah grabbed her flashlight and pointed it at the figure, but the light flickered and went out. When she tried to turn it back on, the figure had disappeared into the shadows. The next day, the group was nowhere to be found. Sarah woke up to find herself alone, her teammates gone without a trace. She searched frantically, but there was no sign of them, only their belongings scattered across the jungle floor. As she ventured deeper into the jungle, the oppressive feeling of being hunted grew stronger. The jungle was alive with eyes that followed her every move. She called out for her teammates, but her voice was swallowed by the thick, humid air. Every step felt like a mistake, each path she took leading her further into the dark heart of the jungle. The overwhelming silence was broken only by the distant calls of strange birds and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. Sarah knew she wasn't alone. Suddenly, she stumbled upon an ancient, weathered stone altar deep in the forest. The altar was covered with symbols that she couldn't decipher, and it radiated a cold, unnatural energy. A chill ran down her spine as she realized that this must be the place where Tarzan had been bound, where the ritual had taken place. She knelt by the altar, instinctively feeling drawn to the dark markings. She traced one with her finger, and in that instant, the ground beneath her feet trembled. The trees around her shook violently, as if in response to her touch. The once silent jungle now erupted with a cacophony of terrifying sounds. Growls, screeches, and unearthly howls filled the air. Sarah's heart raced as she stood, her body frozen in fear. She tried to run, but the dense undergrowth seemed to close in around her, trapping her like a spider's web. A low growl echoed through the jungle, and before Sarah could react, a massive shadow darted from the trees. It was Tarzan. He appeared like a nightmare, his glowing yellow eyes locked onto her, his massive form towering above her. His primal feral nature was evident in every movement, and she could feel the jungle itself breathing with him. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice a guttural growl that made her blood run cold. "The jungle is mine. You trespass on sacred ground." Sarah backed away, her mind racing for a way to escape. But as she turned, the jungle seemed to come alive, the trees themselves shifting and twisting to block her path. It was as though the entire forest was under his control. Every step she took seemed to be leading her further into his world. Tarzan moved with inhuman speed, his movements graceful and terrifying all at once. He circled her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You will never leave," he whispered, his breath hot and heavy on her neck. "This is where you belong now, just like the others." Fear coursed through Sarah's veins as she realized that the curse of the jungle had claimed another soul. The ancient being was not just a protector of the jungle, but its ruler, a being bound by dark forces that could never be escaped. She tried to scream for help, but the sound was swallowed by the jungle's deafening roar. The trees seemed to close in around her, trapping her in an inescapable web of branches and vines. The jungle had become her prison, just as it had become Tarzan's. As the days passed, Sarah's mind began to unravel. Her body grew weaker as she struggled to survive in the oppressive jungle, but Tarzan was always there, watching, waiting. Every so often he would appear in the shadows, his yellow eyes gleaming as he observed her struggle. The jungle seemed to feed off her fear, growing darker and more twisted with each passing moment. One night, she thought she saw a flicker of hope. A small group of travelers appeared in the distance, their torches lighting the path through the dense foliage. She rushed towards them, desperate for help, but as she called out to them, their faces twisted in terror. They looked like the very same people who had entered the jungle before her. They were not alive. They were shadows, trapped in the jungle for eternity, forced to wander the cursed land under Tarzan's watchful gaze. And then she realized it was too late. There was no escape. She had become part of the jungle now. Without warning, a deep voice echoing through the trees whispered her name, Sarah. The voice was familiar, yet foreign, like it had been there for centuries. It was the voice of Tarzan. Without warning, a massive form lunged from the trees above her. Sarah barely had time to react as she was thrown to the ground by the creature's immense strength. She looked up and saw the beast's face, a grotesque blend of man and ape. Tarzan's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment it felt as though time had stopped. "You should not have come here," he growled in a low, menacing voice. "This jungle is mine. Now you will become part of it." Before Sarah could scream, the world around her began to spin, and the last thing she saw was Tarzan's glowing eyes and a twisted grin on his face. The jungle swallowed her whole, and she disappeared into the darkness, her fate sealed forever. The villagers still whisper about Sarah and the others who were lost to Tarzan's curse. The jungle remains untouched, a deadly place where no one dares to tread, for the legend of Tarzan lives on, an ancient creature that guards the jungle with an unrelenting fury, ensuring that no one escapes his domain. The end.